July 30th, 1943, 06:15 hours, RAF Kimbolton, England. The tail gunner's compartment measured 4 feet wide, 5 feet long, a coffin with windows. Staff Sergeant Callum Brenner settled onto the bicycle seat that would be his world for the next 6 hours. 24 years old, 12 combat missions behind him, 3 confirmed kills. The morning air tasted like aviation fuel and fear. Through the plexiglass bubble, he watched the grey English dawn stretch across the airfield. 186 bombers sat on hard stands across eastern England. By noon, some would be burning wreckage scattered across Germany. Some would limp home with dead men in their bellies. Some would simply vanish into the North Sea. The mathematics were simple. The average B-17 crew survived 11 missions before being shot down, killed, or captured. Cal had beaten the average, barely. His 2 Browning M250 caliber machine guns pointed backward through the curved plexiglass. 800 rounds of ammunition, standard load, standard procedure, standard doctrine that was killing tail gunners faster than German bullets. The intercom crackled. "Tail gunner, you ready back there?" Lieutenant Marcus Webb's voice. The pilot, young, capable, Texan drawl that never quite disappeared, even at 26,000 feet. "Ready?" Cal said. He wasn't. The engines coughed, sputtered, then roared. 4 Wright cyclones shaking the airframe. Iron resolve trembled like a living thing preparing to launch itself into violence. 500 miles into Germany today, castle, ball-bearing factories. The Luftwaffe knew they were coming. 300 German fighters waited somewhere along that route. Cal checked his ammunition belts one final time. 400 rounds per gun. The manual said it was enough. Cal had already decided the manual was designed by men who'd never sat in a tail gunner's seat while Messerschmitts came screaming out of the sun. Iron resolve lurched forward, taxied toward the runway, joined the stream of bombers lifting into morning mist. At 25,000 feet, the temperature outside would drop to 60 degrees below zero. Cal's electrically heated suit was the only barrier between survival and death by hypothermia. The Army called it the loneliest job in the war. They weren't wrong. 40 feet of aluminum fuselage separated him from the rest of the crew. No one to talk to when the fighters came. No one to help if something went wrong. Just a man. 2 guns. And whatever the Luftwaffe sent his way. The engines changed pitch. Iron Resolve's tail lifted. The bomber accelerated down the runway. Cal felt the moment the wheels left English soil. Felt gravity release them into sky that might become tomb. By noon, he'd either be dead or prove every manual wrong. 1 month earlier, June 1943, Cal's first mission had been a textbook exercise. Follow doctrine, wait for the enemy to close to 300 yards, conserve ammunition, fire in controlled bursts. He'd followed every rule. The bomber next to them exploded anyway. Direct hit to the number 2 engine. Fire spread faster than thought. The B-17 fell out of formation, trailing black smoke and burning men. Cal counted 8 parachutes. The tail gunner wasn't among them. "That's how it happens," the waist gunner had said after they landed. "Fast, no warning. 1 second you're flying, next second you're burning." Cal didn't sleep that night. He ran calculations instead. Approach speed, closure rate, reaction time, bullet velocity, the mathematics of death at altitude. A Messerschmitt Bf 109, closing at 350 miles per hour from the 6 o'clock position, had nearly 10 seconds to aim and fire before passing the bomber. 10 seconds of German cannon shells pouring into American aluminum. 10 seconds of destruction. The tail gunner had those same 10 seconds to hit a target moving at combined speeds approaching 600 miles per hour. The doctrine said wait, 300 yards, conserve ammunition, Don't waste bullets on long-range shots. The doctrine assumed gunners survived long enough to follow it. Cal had watched 5 bombers go down in his first 3 missions, watched German fighters approach from behind, watched American gunners wait for doctrine, wait for 300 yards. Most never got the shot. The Focke-Wulf 190 carried 2 20mm cannons and 2 13mm machine guns. A single burst could shred plexiglass, kill the gunner, disable tail controls, turn a bomber into a falling coffin. Cal understood something the doctrine writers didn't. The enemy wasn't cooperating with the manual. German pilots had studied American tactics. They knew the gunners waited until 300 yards, so they opened fire at 600 yards, poured cannon shells into formations while Americans held their triggers. Waiting, following orders, dying. Mission 3, June 18, 1943. The bomber flying off Iron Resolve's right wing took a direct hit to the tail section at 12:47 hours. Cal watched it happen. The Messerschmitt came in fast from 6 o'clock high, diving, guns already flashing. The American tail gunner was waiting, following doctrine, 300 yards, conserve ammunition. The German didn't wait. 20mm shells punched through the plexiglass before the American could react. Cal saw the impacts, saw the tail gunner's position disintegrate, saw the fighter pull up and away, unscathed, victorious. The bomber fell out of formation, trailing smoke, dying. 8 parachutes emerged. The tail gunner was not among them. That night, Cal filled 3 pages of his notebook with calculations. Trigonometry, ballistics, probability theory. The mathematics were clear. 300 yards meant the enemy was already shooting, already killing. The doctrine guaranteed American death. There had to be another way. Mission 4, June 25, 1943. Saint Nazaire. The submarine pens sat on the French coast like concrete tumors. Strategic targets, heavily defended. The briefing had promised fighter opposition. The briefing wasn't lying. 2 Bf-109s appeared at 11:32 hours, climbing from 6 o'clock low. The classic tail attack. Textbook approach. Cal watched them come. 800 yards, 700, 600. Standard doctrine said wait. 300 yards. Conserve ammunition. Cal squeezed both triggers at 700 yards. The twin Brownings roared, tracers arced across empty sky, bright orange lines reaching toward the climbing fighters. The first rounds fell short, physics and gravity pulling bullets earthward. Cal adjusted, walked the fire upward, squeezed harder. At 600 yards the tracers began connecting. Bright flashes sparked along the lead Messerschmitt's engine cowling. Not kills, not yet, but visible damage, visible threat. The German pilot saw death reaching for him 400 yards before doctrine said it should arrive. He broke off. Hard right bank, diving away. His wingman followed without firing a shot. Both fighters disappeared into cloud cover. 0 damage to Iron Resolve. The entire engagement lasted 11 seconds. Cal had expended 200 rounds, more than most gunners used in an entire mission. The crew chief noticed after landing. 200 rounds? The sergeant stood in the tail section, holding the ammunition count sheet. On 2 fighters that didn't even press their attack. They didn't press, Cal said, because I was already shooting. The manual says, the manual assumes we survive long enough to follow it. The crew chief stared, said nothing, walked away. Lieutenant Webb found Cal that evening. The pilot leaned against Iron Resolve's tail section, lit a cigarette, watched the sun set over English fields. Heard you're wasting ammunition, Webb said. Heard we came back alive, Cal replied. Webb exhaled smoke. That we did. You planning to keep shooting early? Planning to keep coming back alive, the pilot nodded. crushed the cigarette under his boot. Fair enough. Just make sure it works. Missions 5 through 11, June 26th through July 22nd. Cal refined his technique. 700 yards proved optimal, far enough to disrupt the attack, close enough to score hits if the enemy pressed. The key wasn't accuracy, the key was disruption. German fighters attacked because they believed they had time to line up, time to aim, time to fire before American gunners reacted. Cal removed that time. Tracers reaching out at 700 yards changed the equation, changed the psychology. A pilot watching orange fire stream toward his aircraft at long range instinctively maneuvered, even when the rounds fell short, even when logic said wait. Instinct overrode logic at 600 miles per hour. By mid-July, other tail gunners noticed Iron Resolve's survival rate, started asking questions. Sergeant Eddie Walsh approached Cal after Mission 8. Walsh flew tail gun on Lucky Strike. Young, 22, scared eyes that tried to hide behind bravado. "How do you do it?" Walsh asked. "Do what?" "Come back without holes. We follow doctrine. We still get shot to hell." Cal showed him the calculations, the trigonometry of disruption, the psychology of early fire. "You'll burn through ammunition," Walsh said. "Dead men don't need reserve ammunition." Walsh started shooting early. His survival rate improved. So did 2 other tail gunners who adopted the technique. The pattern became undeniable. Squadron gunnery officers reviewed combat footage, saw tracers reaching beyond normal engagement range, saw German fighters breaking off attacks before reaching effective firing positions. The data told a story the doctrine couldn't explain. Early engagement reduced bomber casualties, disrupted coordinated fighter attacks, forced enemy pilots into defensive maneuvering that degraded accuracy. But changing doctrine meant admitting the old doctrine was wrong, meant admitting American boys had died following flawed procedures. Bureaucracy moved slower than bullets. By July 22nd, the 379th Bombardment Group had lost 9 aircraft in 2 months, 90 men gone, most following doctrine, most waiting until 300 yards. Most dying before pulling their triggers. Cal had flown 11 missions, Iron Resolve had taken minimal damage, 3 confirmed kills, 0 casualties. The mathematics spoke louder than manuals. Lieutenant Raymond Dalton found Cal in the tail section on the evening of July 29th. The navigator, quiet, thoughtful, the kind of man who wrote everything down. "Tomorrow's castle," Dalton said. "I know." 500 miles into Germany, longest penetration yet. "I know." Dalton held a folder. Mission intelligence. They're estimating 300 German fighters along the route. Cal said nothing. "I've been tracking the data," Dalton continued. "Your engagements, Walsh's, the others, using your technique. Survival rates are 34% higher than standard doctrine. You should tell someone." "I did." Group commander received the preliminary report September 1st. Dalton paused. "They're reviewing it. While some of us keep dying, you're proving there's another way." Cal checked his guns, both Brownings, freshly cleaned, mechanisms smooth. "Tomorrow's going to test everything." "I know." Dalton turned to leave, stopped. "Cal?" "Yeah?" "Keep coming back. The numbers only matter if you're alive to prove them." July 30th, 1943. 0600 hours. The briefing room smelled like coffee and cigarette smoke and fear. 120 men packed into space meant for 80. Every crew from the 379th. Some would be corpses by sunset. The intelligence officer pulled back the curtain, revealed the map. The red string stretched from England across the Channel, across France, across Belgium, deep into Germany. Castle. Ball-bearing factories. 500 miles of hostile airspace. Someone whistled low. Someone else cursed. Expected opposition, the intelligence officer said, is heavy. Luftwaffe has positioned 300-plus fighters along the route. P-47 escorts will take you as far as Belgium. After that, you're on your own. The room stayed silent. Questions? No one asked what everyone wondered. How many empty seats would there be at tonight's meal? Cal walked to Iron Resolve in pre-dawn darkness. Ground crew still loading ammunition, bombs hanging heavy in the belly. The bomber looked tired. 11 missions, battle damage repaired, patched, painted over, ready to bleed again. He climbed through the narrow hatch, crawled 40 feet through aluminum tube, reached the tail section. His world, his tomb, his station, 4 feet wide, 5 feet long, 2 guns, 800 rounds. No, not 800. Cal had already decided. He loaded 1,200 rounds instead, 50% over standard. If the crew chief noticed, he'd deal with it later. Better to face questions than bullets with an empty gun. He settled onto the bicycle seat, checked the feed mechanisms, tested the traverse, everything smooth, everything ready. Through the plexiglass, dawn broke across English fields. Beautiful, serene, completely divorced from the violence waiting 500 miles east. The intercom crackled. All stations check in. One by one, the crew reported ready. Pilot, co-pilot, navigator, bombardier, engineer, radio operator, waist gunners, ball turret. Tail gunner, Cal keyed his microphone. Tail position, ready. The engines started. 4 right cyclones shaking reality. Iron Resolve trembled. Alive, angry, ready. They taxied, waited their turn, watched other bombers lift into growing light. Then it was their time. Iron Resolve accelerated. The tail lifted. The world dropped away. 186 bombers climbed into formation. A stream of aluminum and explosives and young men heading east, heading toward Castle, heading toward 300 German fighters. Cal watched England recede through his plexiglass window, the white cliffs of Dover shrinking to pale lines. Then ocean, then occupied France. Ahead lay Belgium, Germany, the heart of Nazi industrial power. The P-47 escorts held position around the bomber stream. Thunderbolts. Beautiful, deadly, temporary. Their fuel would last 90 minutes. The mission would take 6 hours. For most of the journey, the bombers would fly alone. At 1100 hours, the Thunderbolts waggled their wings, turned back toward England, fuel gauges demanding retreat. The bombers pressed on. Somewhere ahead, 300 German fighters were waiting. Cal would need every round he'd loaded, every technique he'd developed, every second of reaction time he could steal. The intercom stayed mostly silent, each man alone with his thoughts, his fears, his calculations of survival. Cal's hands rested on the gun grips, not tense, not relaxed, ready. The space between action and waiting. He thought about the tail gunner who died on Mission 3, thought about the doctrine that promised safety through patience, thought about the calculations that proved doctrine wrong, thought about the choice every man faced at altitude. Follow orders or survive. Sometimes you couldn't do both. At 11:42 hours, the first Messerschmitts appeared, climbing from the southeast in groups of 4, black crosses on yellow noses, death wearing aluminum skin. Cal counted 8, then 12, then stopped counting. The sky behind Iron Resolve filled with enemy fighters. The intercom crackled. Bandits 6 o'clock high, here they come. The lead fighter began its attack run, diving toward the formation at 400 miles per hour. Cal tracked it through his gun sight, watched the wingspan grow larger, watched death approach in seconds measured by heartbeats. 800 yards, 700, 600. Standard doctrine said wait. 300 yards, conserve ammunition, follow the manual. Cal had buried the manual 11 missions ago. He squeezed both triggers. The twin Brownings roared to life. Tracers arced across empty sky, reached toward the diving Messerschmitt. Reached 400 yards before doctrine said they should. The first rounds fell short, disappeared into air below the fighter. Cal adjusted, walked the fire upward, held the triggers down. At 600 yards, the tracers began connecting. Bright flashes sparked along the Messerschmitt's engine cowling. The fighter shuddered. Smoke trailed from damaged metal. The German pilot broke hard right, rolled away, never completed his firing pass. The fighter spiraled downward, disappeared into cloud layer below. Kill number 1. Cal had no time to watch. The second attacker was already closing. This one came in lower, trying to slip beneath his field of fire. Difficult angle, required depressing the guns nearly to mechanical limit. He fired anyway. Long burst. Tracers streaming toward the approaching Fokker Wolf. The pilot flinched, pulled up early, released cannon shells into empty sky above Iron Resolve. The attacks continued, wave after wave. German fighters slashing through the bomber formation, hunting stragglers, targeting damaged aircraft. Cal fired at everything within range, burned ammunition at 3 times recommended rate. His gun barrels glowed red from sustained fire. The mathematics of survival had nothing to do with conservation, everything to do with disruption. At 12:29 hours, a Bf-109 approached from directly astern, flying straight and level, either extraordinary courage or poor judgment. Cal centered the fighter in his gun sight, held both triggers down. 6 continuous seconds, over 100 rounds, all of them finding target. The Messerschmitt disintegrated, the engine separated from fuselage, wings folded backward. What remained tumbled past Iron Resolve close enough for Cal to see the empty cockpit. The pilot had either ejected or died at the controls. Kill number 2. His ammunition counter read 180 rounds remaining, 420 expended. The formation still had to reach Castle, still had to bomb the target, still had to fly 250 miles back to England through the same gauntlet. But Iron Resolve was still flying, still fighting, still alive. The doctrine would have gotten them killed by now. Cal's hands stayed steady on the gun grips. His eyes scanned the sky, searching for the next fighter, the next threat, the next equation to solve with tracers and determination and mathematics that valued survival over regulation. Around him, other bombers burned. Other tail gunners died following procedures designed by men who'd never faced a Messerschmitt at 25,000 feet. Cal kept shooting early, kept disrupting attacks, kept proving there was another way. The Castle mission was only half over. By sunset, he'd either validate everything he'd learned or join the men who'd followed doctrine into graves. The choice had been made 11 missions ago. Now came the proof. 1,229 hours, over Castle, 2 kills, 180 rounds remaining, 250 miles of hostile sky between Iron Resolve and England. The formation reached Castle at 12:51. Began its bombing run. For 11 minutes, the bombers would fly straight and level, unable to maneuver, unable to evade. While bombardiers lined up their targets through Norden sights, while German gunners below calculated trajectories, while Luftwaffe fighters circled like wolves, sensing wounded prey. The Germans knew this moment, knew American bombers became flying coffins during the bombing run, New defensive fire diminished when gunners couldn't traverse their weapons during precision flight. They pressed their attacks with renewed fury. A Focke-Wulf 190 dove on iron resolve from the 5 o'clock position, steep angle, fast, already firing. Cal swung his guns to meet it, squeezed the triggers, short burst, 30 rounds. The tracers struck the fighter's wing root. Visible damage, but not enough. The pilot kept coming. 20mm cannon shells tore through Iron Resolve's tail section. Cal heard the impacts before he understood what was happening, heard metal shredding, heard hydraulic lines rupturing, heard his left gun jam with the sound of mechanisms dying. Then he felt the pain. Fragments ripped through the plexiglass, shredded his flight suit, buried themselves in his left arm, his shoulder, his upper back. 11 pieces of German steel finding American flesh. Blood sprayed across the compartment, freezing almost instantly in the 60 below air. His left arm went numb, not from cold, from nerve damage, from shock, from the reality of metal tearing through muscle. The left gun was dead, receiver shattered by the same shell that had wounded him. Hydraulic fluid sprayed from severed lines, mixed with blood, created a crimson fog in the cramped space. Cal kept firing with the right gun, one-handed, bleeding, vision blurring from shock. He tracked the wounded Focke-Wulf as it pulled away from its attack run. The German pilot thought he'd killed the tail gunner, thought the position was neutralized. He was wrong. Cal centered the fighter in his sight picture, held the trigger down, walked tracers across the fighter's tail assembly, watched rounds connect, watched the vertical stabilizer disintegrate. The FW-190 snap-rolled, inverted, dove toward the ground 12,000 feet below, kill number 3. Cal released the trigger, tried to key his microphone. His throat had gone dry. Couldn't form words, couldn't report his status, couldn't tell the crew he was hit. The intercom crackled with voices. Someone asking about damage, someone else reporting flak ahead. The normal chaos of combat. Cal wrapped a scarf around his wounded arm. The fabric soaked through immediately. Blood pooled on the floor of his compartment, created a small frozen lake of crimson ice. 400 rounds expended, 63 remaining, 3 German fighters destroyed. The mission was only half over. Through the plexiglass, Cal watched Castle burning beneath a column of black smoke. Watched the bomber formation turn westward. Watched 2 B-17’s trailing fire fall out of formation. Watched parachutes blossom like flowers in hell. Iron Resolve still flew, still fought, held position in the lead element, but the tail gun position was dying. 1 weapon destroyed, 1 operator wounded, 63 rounds between survival and catastrophe. The mathematics had changed. Cal adjusted his calculations accordingly. 1304 hours. The return journey begins. 250 miles of enemy territory. The same gauntlet they'd flown through coming in. Except now the Luftwaffe knew which bombers were damaged, knew which crews were wounded, knew which aircraft made easy targets. German fighters regrouped over Belgium, positioned themselves along the bomber stream's route to the Channel. Fresh aircraft replaced those lost or damaged in morning attacks. The second gauntlet would be as dangerous as the first. Cal remained at his position. Blood-smeared plexiglass reduced visibility. His left arm hung useless. The jammed gun mocked him with its silence. 1 functioning weapon, 63 rounds, 250 miles. Every trigger pull had to count. The luxury of suppressive fire was gone. The luxury of disruption through volume no longer existed. Now he needed precision, needed to make every tracer matter. At 63 rounds, he could afford perhaps 3 engagements, 20 rounds each. Miss, and the bomber died. Hesitate, and the crew died. Follow old doctrine, and everyone died. At 13:31, 2 BF-109s closed from the 7 o'clock position. Slightly high, classic pursuit curve they'd learned from morning losses. approaching from an angle that forced the tail gunner into awkward traverse. Cal waited 500 yards, 450. Standard doctrine would have meant opening fire at 300 yards. His technique from this morning would have meant 700 yards. Now, with 63 rounds, he needed a third option. 500 yards, perfect range, close enough for accuracy, far enough for reaction if he missed. He fired 12 rounds, short burst, precise. Tracers arced across sky, connected with the lead Messerschmitt's engine cowling. Coolant exploded from ruptured lines, white smoke trailing. The fighter rolled inverted, dove away. His wingman broke off without attacking, German pilots had learned. American tail gunners were dangerous, even when wounded. 51 rounds remaining. The pain in Cal's arm had evolved from sharp to dull, from immediate to distant. Shock was setting in. The body's mercy, shutting down non-essential systems, prioritizing survival. He couldn't feel his fingers on the left hand, couldn't move the arm without nausea, but his right hand still worked. Right eye still tracked targets, right gun still fired. That was enough. Iron Resolve crossed into France at 14:15. The fighter attacks diminished. Luftwaffe reaching operational range limits. Fuel gauges demanding return to base. The bomber stream had outrun immediate pursuit, but not danger. Never danger. German fighters could appear at any moment, could exploit any gap in defensive fire, could turn a wounded bomber into a falling torch. Cal scanned the sky. Methodical, quadrant by quadrant, searching for the black crosses that meant death, finding only empty blue and distant contrails. At 14:47, the last German interceptors turned back, their fuel exhausted, their ammunition expended, their nerve tested by American gunners who refused to die quietly. The English Channel appeared on the horizon, grey water, cold salvation. 20 minutes away, Cal allowed himself to breathe, allowed himself to acknowledge the pain, allowed himself to count the cost. 11 fragment wounds, left arm destroyed, gun position wrecked, ammunition nearly gone, but alive, crew intact, Iron Resolve still flying. The mathematics had worked, barely, desperately, but they'd worked. 1,552 hours. RAF Kimbolton. Iron Resolve's wheels touched English concrete. The bomber rolled to a stop. Engines coughed into silence. Cal tried to climb out of the tail section. His body refused. The adrenaline was gone. Shock had taken full control. His legs wouldn't support his weight. Ground crew reached the tail position, saw the blood, saw the destroyed gun, saw Cal slumped against the plexiglass. They pulled him through the narrow hatch, lifted him like cargo, carried him to a waiting ambulance. The flight surgeon counted wounds while medics cut away the flight suit. 11 separate fragments, arm, shoulder, back. None had hit major arteries, none had punctured lungs, luck measured in millimeters. "You'll live," the surgeon said. You'll hurt like hell for a while, but you'll live." Cal nodded. Couldn't form words yet. Throat still dry from combat and shock and 6 hours of breathing oxygen through a mask. Word spread through the 379th Bombardment Group before the surgeon finished bandaging wounds. The tail gunner on Iron Resolve, 3 confirmed kills, 2 probables while wounded, operating single gun, 63 rounds of ammunition. Other tail gunners came to the hospital that evening, stood at the foot of Cal's bed, asked questions. "How do you do it?" Cal's voice came out rough, raw. "Math."
Math? Disruption equals survival. Volume of fire matters less than timing. Hit them before they expect it. Force them to react instead of aim. Sergeant Eddie Walsh pushed through the small crowd. "The standard doctrine says wait until 300 yards. Standard doctrine produces dead gunners." Walsh nodded. "I've been shooting early since you showed me. Lucky strike came back today. Minimal damage. Other ships following doctrine?" He gestured toward the window.
toward the flight line where ground crews worked through the night repairing battle damage. They're not so lucky. The squadron gunnery officer arrived at 2100 hours, Captain Milton Brennan, 35 years old, career officer, by the book to his corps. He dismissed the other gunners, stood at Cal's bedside, holding a folder. "I reviewed the combat footage from your mission," Brennan said. Cal waited. "Your gun camera shows you engaging targets at 800 yards, 700, 600, far beyond recommended range." "Recommended range gets people killed, sir. Recommended range is based on 2 years of combat analysis." "Combat analysis by men who aren't getting shot at." Brennan's jaw tightened. "You expended 400 rounds before you were hit. That's 50% of your combat load. And brought iron resolve home intact. Other gunners are copying your technique. 3 of them tried it today." Brennan opened the folder, read from a report. Sergeant Walsh, Sergeant Crawford, Sergeant Daniels, all 3 engaged targets beyond 500 yards. All 3 burned through ammunition faster than mission parameters allow. "All 3 came home alive," Cal said. "This time, what happens when they run out of ammunition before reaching the target? What happens when a sustained attack requires defensive fire and their guns are empty?" Cal met the captain's eyes. "What happens when they follow doctrine and die before pulling the trigger? I watched it happen on Mission 3. German fighter opened fire at 600 yards. Our tail gunner waited for 300, like the manual says. Died before he could shoot back. One incident, 5 bombers down in my first 3 missions, all following doctrine, all dead." Brennan closed the folder. "The doctrine exists for a reason, Sergeant. Ammunition discipline, coordinated defense, predictable engagement ranges." "Predictable for who? Us or the Germans?" Silence. The captain stared at Cal. Cal stared back, neither yielding. Finally, Brennan spoke. "You have 3 weeks medical leave. When you return to flight status, you'll follow standard engagement procedures. That's an order." He left before Cal could respond. Lieutenant Raymond Dalton appeared in the doorway 30 minutes later. The navigator. Still in flight suit. Still smelling of oxygen and fear and survival. "Heard about Brennan's visit," Dalton said. "Word travels fast. Always does in a bomber group." Dalton pulled a chair close to the bed. "I've been documenting mission data, survival rates, engagement ranges, ammunition expenditure. The correlation is undeniable." "Tell that to the captain." "I did, yesterday. Gave him a preliminary report showing early engagement reduces losses by 34% across 14 missions." Cal shifted in the bed. Pain shot through his shoulder. "What did he say?" "He said changing doctrine requires evidence from multiple groups. Said one squadron's data isn't enough. Said the 8th Air Force doesn't modify procedures based on anecdotal success." "Anecdotal," Cal laughed. It hurt. "How many men need to die before it stops being anecdotal?" Dalton didn't answer, couldn't answer. The question had no good response. "I'm writing everything down," the navigator said quietly. "Every mission, every engagement, every decision."
Someday, this will matter. Someday people will want to know how we survived. If we survive. When we survive. Dalton stood. "Get some rest. 3 weeks goes fast. Iron Resolve will need her tail gunner back." After he left, Cal stared at the ceiling, counted cracks in the plaster, counted his heartbeats, counted the days until he could climb back into that 4x5 coffin with windows. 3 weeks. Felt like forever. Felt like abandoning the crew. Felt like leaving the equation unsolved. But his body needed time. Needed healing. The fragments in his shoulder would take weeks to work their way out. The nerve damage in his arm might never fully repair. The flight surgeon had been clear. Push too hard, too fast, and permanent disability waited. So Cal waited, healed, calculated. August 1943.
The war didn't wait for wounded gunners to recover. The 379th flew 11 missions while Cal was grounded, lost 2 more bombers, 20 men gone. Some following doctrine, some trying Cal's technique without full understanding, some just unlucky. German intelligence officers noticed the pattern. American tail gunners opening fire earlier. Sometimes 600 yards, sometimes 700. The change disrupted attack formations that had worked reliably for months. Luftwaffe tactical response came in 3 phases. First, increased approach speeds, diving on formations at maximum velocity to reduce exposure time. Second, shifted attack angles, approaching from high 6 o'clock where gravity-assisted pull-out. Third, targeting specific aircraft with aggressive gunners. Eliminate the threat before it spreads. None of these adaptations solved the fundamental problem. Faster approaches meant less accurate shooting. Steeper angles increased difficulty tracking targets through the dive. Targeting aggressive gunners required identifying them in advance. Nearly impossible in chaos of running air battle. But the Luftwaffe was learning, adapting. The advantage Cal had created was already eroding. War was a conversation between innovations, each side studying the other, developing counters, finding weaknesses. The temporary edge aggressive fire provided wouldn't last forever. Cal knew this, understood the enemy wasn't static, wasn't predictable, would find ways to exploit any pattern. The equation required constant evolution. August 19th, the flight surgeon cleared Cal for duty. Wounds have healed enough. Nerve damage in your arm is permanent but functional. You'll have reduced strength, reduced fine motor control, but you can operate the guns. Good enough, Cal said. The question is whether it should be. The surgeon leaned back in his chair. You've done 12 missions. That's above average survival. You've been wounded once. Next time you might not be lucky. Luck had nothing to do with it. No? The surgeon gestured at Cal's scarred shoulder. Fragments missed your brachial artery by less than half an inch. That's luck, Sergeant. Pure random luck. Cal stood. I'll take my chances. He walked to Iron Resolve that afternoon. Found a different bomber wearing the same name. The old girl had been written off. Too much battle damage, too expensive to repair. Ground crews had stripped her for parts, scrapped the rest. The replacement carried the same nose art, same crew, same mission, just a different collection of aluminum and rivets pretending to be invincible. Cal climbed into the tail section, tested the new guns, everything smooth, everything ready. The bicycle seat felt familiar. The plexiglass window faced the same direction, 4 feet wide, 5 feet long, home. Lieutenant Webb found him there at sunset. Welcome back. Good to be back? Brennan's been asking about you, wants to talk before you fly again. Cal nodded, expected as much. For what it's worth, Webb continued, the crew wants you back there. Your way works. We all know it, even if command doesn't want to admit it. Thanks. The pilot left. Cal stayed in the tail position, watched the sun set through plexiglass, watched shadows stretch across the airfield, watched night claim the sky that would try to kill him again tomorrow. He thought about Bobby Chen. No. Wrong story. That was the old draft. He thought about the tail gunner from Mission 3, thought about the doctrine that promised safety through patience, thought about the 5 bombers lost in his first 3 missions, thought about the choice every man faced in this war. Follow orders or survive. 3 weeks ago, he'd proved survival was possible through defiance. Tomorrow, he'd have to prove it again. The mathematics were clear. The enemy was adapting, the advantage was eroding, but the alternative was following doctrine back into a grave. Cal made his choice 11 missions ago. Nothing had changed except the enemy's understanding of the game. Time to evolve the equation. Time to prove innovation could survive adaptation. Time to climb back into the sky and teach the Luftwaffe that American gunners had learned a new language, the language of early fire, of disruption, of survival through aggression. 3 weeks of healing were over. The test was just beginning. September 5th, 1943, evening briefing. The curtain pulled back. The red string stretched deeper into Germany than Cal had ever seen. Stuttgart. 500 miles into southern Germany. Ball-bearing factories, components essential to every German vehicle, every aircraft, every weapon. Strategic importance made it one of the most heavily defended targets in Europe. The intelligence officer's voice was flat, professional. Expected fighter opposition, 400 aircraft from bases in France, Belgium and Germany proper. Flak batteries ring the city. You'll be flying in lead position. Lead position. First to absorb attacks, first to face coordinated assault, maximum exposure. Someone in the back of the room coughed. Someone else shifted weight. Small sounds, human sounds, fear-wearing thin disguises. Cal sat motionless, calculated trajectories, ammunition requirements, survival probabilities. The mathematics were worse than Castle. That evening, he loaded 1,200 rounds into Iron Resolve's tail guns. Ground crew watched but said nothing. Brennan's orders about standard loads had been quietly ignored. Results mattered more than regulations. Cal checked both Brownings, freshly serviced, barrels replaced, feed mechanisms smooth as silk, everything ready. Tomorrow would test whether innovation could survive in the face of overwhelming opposition. September 6, 1943, 0540 hours. 187 bombers lifted into overcast English sky, formed up over the North Sea, turned southeast toward occupied Europe, toward Stuttgart, toward whatever the Luftwaffe had prepared. Iron Resolve flew lead element of the 379th Formation. Cal positioned where he'd face first attacks from any direction. At 0915, the fighters found them over France. Messerschmitts and Focke-Wulfs rose from airfields across the region, climbed to intercept altitude. The initial attacks came from 11 o'clock, head-on passes testing nose gunners rather than tail. Cal waited, watched contrails multiply behind the formation. The Luftwaffe was building strength, assembling fighters from multiple units, creating concentrated force. By 0940, intelligence estimates counted over 100 interceptors tracking the bombers. The rear attacks began at 10:08. 12 Bf-109s positioned themselves 2,000 feet below the formation, then pulled up in climbing attack from 6 o'clock low. Coordinated, practiced, deadly. Cal opened fire at 700 yards. 2 fighters broke off immediately. They'd learned. American tail gunners no longer waited. A third absorbed multiple hits, fell away smoking. The remaining 9 pressed their attack. Cannon shells ripped through the formation, struck bombers throughout the 379th Combat Box. The B-17 flying off Iron Resolve's left wing took hits to No. 3 engine. Another bomber in the low squadron began trailing fuel from ruptured tanks. Cal kept firing, shifted from target to target. Fighters flashed through his field of view like lethal shadows. His ammunition counter dropped steadily. 600 rounds, 500, 400. The attacks showed no sign of diminishing. German fighters had studied American defensive patterns, learned the timing, adapted their approach. They came in waves now. Coordinated strikes designed to overwhelm defensive fire through sheer numbers. Cal's technique worked against individual attacks, against calculated approaches, against pilots who expected gunners to wait. Against overwhelming force, mathematics alone weren't enough. At 1031, a Focke-Wulf 190 dove on Iron Resolve from directly above and behind, using the sun to mask its approach. Perfect geometry, perfect timing. Cal spotted the fighter too late. 20mm shells punched through the tail section before he could bring his guns to bear. The impacts threw him against the plexiglass. His left gun was destroyed, receiver shattered by direct hit. Fragments tore through his flight suit, but these fragments didn't hit arm or shoulder. They hit his head, his scalp, his skull. Blood poured down his face, warm, thick, blinding. Cal couldn't see, couldn't think through the sudden pressure, couldn't understand why his vision had turned red. He wiped his eyes with his sleeve. Blood smeared across fabric. Vision cleared for a moment, just long enough to see the Fokker Wolf pulling up from its dive, just long enough to center it in his gun sight. Cal fired, one-handed, half-blind, operating on instinct and rage and refusing to die. The right gun hammered. Tracers connected with the fighter's fuselage. Smoke trailed from damaged metal. The FW190 rolled away, limping. Wounded, but not dead. Cal released the trigger, tried to wipe more blood from his eyes. His head felt wrong. Pressure building. Pain unlike anything from the castle mission. This wasn't fragments in muscle. This was fragments in bone, in brain tissue, in whatever made a man capable of thought. He blinked. Vision doubled, tripled. The sky multiplied into kaleidoscope of threats. His hands found the gun grips again. Muscle memory. Training deeper than consciousness. He couldn't think clearly, couldn't calculate trajectories, couldn't run the mathematics that had kept him alive, but he could still shoot. The formation reached Stuttgart at 11:04. Iron Resolve held position long enough to release its bombs. Then the damage overwhelmed the pilot's ability to compensate. 2 engines running rough, fuel situation critical, hydraulic systems failing. The bomber fell out of formation like wounded bird acknowledging gravity. The intercom crackled, Lieutenant Webb's voice, calm, despite catastrophe. "We can't make England. Ditching in the channel, all crew, prepare for water impact." Cal remained at his position, watched for fighters that might pursue the crippled bomber. Found only empty sky. The Luftwaffe had other targets. Healthier bombers still flying in formation. Iron Resolve descended through 20,000 feet. 15,000. 10,000. The English Channel appeared below. Grey water. Cold salvation or cold grave, depending on how the next few minutes played out. Cal's vision continued to blur. Double, triple. He touched his head. His hand came away red, covered in blood that wouldn't stop flowing. He tried to crawl forward toward the crew compartment. His body refused coordination. Legs wouldn't obey. Arms moved wrong. The narrow tunnel through the fuselage seemed impossibly long. Lieutenant Dalton appeared, crawled back from navigator position, grabbed Cal's flight suit. "Not leaving you back here." Together they moved through the fuselage, Dalton pulling, Cal trying to help, failing. The world tilted sideways. Sound became distant. Reality became suggestion. At 15:12, Iron Resolve hit the channel, 120 miles per hour, aluminum meeting water at speeds that turned liquid into concrete. The fuselage broke apart. The tail section separated. The wings folded. Cal felt the impact, felt cold water flooding the bomber, felt himself underwater, sinking, drowning, then hands pulling him up, breaking surface. Lieutenant Webb, Dalton, the waist gunners pulling him into a life raft. All 10 crew members survived the ditching. Cal lost consciousness with English sky above and English water below. Safe, home, alive. September 8th, 1943. Station Hospital. Cal woke 3 days later. Severe concussion, skull fracture. Fragment embedded in bone too dangerous to remove, permanent damage to visual processing. Recurring headaches that would last the rest of his life. The flight surgeon sat beside the bed. "You're grounded, Sergeant. Permanently. Another head injury like this and you won't wake up." Cal nodded. couldn't form words yet. Head hurt too much for speech. "For what it's worth," the surgeon continued, "the mission reports came in. You got 2 more kills before you were hit. Brings your total to 17 confirmed. Some records say 19, but documentation's inconsistent. 17, the number felt distant, abstract, like statistics about someone else." The surgeon left. Dalton arrived an hour later. "Heard you're grounded," the navigator said. Cal managed to speak. "Yeah. How do you feel about that?" "Relieved?" The word surprised him, but it was true. Relief. Not guilt, not shame. Just relief that the mathematics had finally caught up. That the odds had collected their due. That he'd survived long enough to be forced to stop. "The analysis came back from 8th Air Force gunnery staff," Dalton said quietly. "They completed the study. 14 bomber groups, 3 months of operations. Early engagement reduces losses by 23% overall." 23%. That's 1,800 lives, Cal. 1,800 men who'll go home because you proved there was a better way. Cal closed his eyes. 1,800. More than he'd ever killed, more than he'd ever saved directly. Just the ripple effect of one man refusing to follow doctrine that was wrong. "They're changing the policy," Dalton continued. "November, new gunnery guidelines authorize engagement at extended ranges when tactical conditions permit. My way becomes their way. Your way becomes the way." After Dalton left, Cal stared at the ceiling, counted his heartbeats, counted the cost. 12 missions, 17 kills, wounded twice, grounded permanently at 24 years old. The war would continue without him. Other men would climb into tail positions. Other men would face the choice between doctrine and survival. Other men would benefit from the mathematics he'd proven with blood and bullets and defiance. He'd done what he set out to do. Survived, protected his crew, changed the system that was killing people. That had to be enough. October 14th, 1943. The Distinguished Service Cross ceremony took place on the flight line, the second highest military decoration the United States Army could award. The citation specifically mentioned innovation under fire. Continued fighting while wounded, protecting the bomber during its most vulnerable moments. They didn't mention the doctrine he'd broken, the orders he'd defied, the regulations he'd ignored. The Distinguished Flying Cross followed 3 weeks later. 2 air medals with oak leaf clusters, Purple Heart with cluster for wounds received in 2 separate actions. By the time his medical board concluded, Cal had accumulated more decorations than most pilots. The medals went into a drawer, the memories went somewhere deeper. November 1943 through 1945. Cal was assigned to Stateside Training Command, teaching new gunners preparing for deployment overseas. He spent the remainder of the war passing his combat experience to students who would carry his methods into every theater, over Germany, over Japan, wherever American bombers faced enemy fighters. The students who survived sent letters, thanking him, confirming his technique worked, reporting successful engagements at extended ranges. Each letter validated the mathematics, validated the defiance, validated the choice to trust calculation over regulation. By war's end, Cal's approach had spread throughout the 8th Air Force. Statistical analysis showed measurable impact, lower loss rates, higher survival probability, defensive gunnery that actually defended. The doctrine had changed, not quickly, not easily, but permanently. 1945. The decision. When the war ended, most veterans wanted civilian life, wanted to forget the sky that had tried to kill them, wanted distance from memories measured in altitude and ammunition. Cal made a different choice. In 1947, he transferred to the newly formed United States Air Force. Continued serving. The decision puzzled those who knew his history. He'd given enough, sacrificed enough, earned the right to walk away. But walking away felt like abandoning something unfinished. The Air Force had given him purpose during the darkest years of the century. The skills he'd developed had saved lives. Not just his own, the crews who'd flown with him, the gunners who'd learned from his methods. Leaving felt like declaring that purpose complete. Declaring those lives saved were sufficient payment. Cal didn't believe in sufficient, believed in continuing, believed in passing knowledge until knowledge became culture, until innovation became doctrine, until survival became expected rather than exceptional. He stayed. Through the Cold War, through Korea, through transformation of air combat from tail gunners and manual sights to missiles and radar, he retired in 1962 as Master Sergeant. 32 years total service, 15 years after he could have stopped. He married, raised children, rarely spoke about the war. The medals stayed in the drawer, the memories stayed locked. Like many of his generation, he believed those who weren't there couldn't truly understand. His family learned about his combat record after his death, found the medals, found the citations, found the calculations in old notebooks he'd kept, found the equation that had saved 1,800 lives. February the 15th, 1990, St. Augustine, Florida. Callum Brenner died at age 70. Complications from the head injury he'd received 47 years earlier finally claimed what German steel had only wounded. 5 days later, his remains arrived at National Memorial Cemetery of Arizona. Full military honors, folded flag, 3-rifle volley, taps played over white headstone. The stone listed his rank, his service branch, his years. It didn't mention 17 confirmed kills, didn't mention doctrine change, didn't mention 1,800 lives saved. Military cemeteries are full of such understatements. Stones mark names and dates, cannot capture weight those names represent. Cal lies among thousands of other veterans, each with stories deserving telling, each with equations solved through sacrifice, each with choices made at altitude between following orders and surviving. The aftermath. Lieutenant Raymond Dalton became a journalist after the war, wrote a memoir titled The Fall of Iron Resolve. The book described their crew's experiences in detail, preserved moments that might otherwise have been lost, ensured that Iron Resolve and her crew would not be forgotten. The 379th Bombardment Group held reunions for decades. Veterans gathered to remember friends who hadn't returned, to share stories their families had never heard, to honor the young men they'd once been. The mighty 8th Air Force Museum in Savannah, Georgia, preserves the history. The 379th's records are archived there. Mission reports document Cal's combat achievements. Researchers can trace the evolution of gunnery doctrine through documents bearing his influence. The B-17 tail gunner position no longer exists. The aircraft that carried men like Cal have mostly vanished, reduced to museum pieces, memorial displays, carefully preserved aluminum reminders of what once filled the sky. But the principles endure, the value of aggressive action over passive defense, the willingness to challenge doctrine that fails in practice, the understanding that survival sometimes requires defiance, the knowledge that individual innovation can change institutional policy. These principles outlived the bombers, outlived the gunners, outlived the war that forged them. The final accounting, 17 confirmed kills, perhaps 19. Documentation inconsistencies make precise counts difficult, but the number that matters isn't 17, isn't 19. It's 1,800. 1,800 men who went home because Cal Brenner refused to follow doctrine that was killing them. 1,800 families who welcomed sons and husbands and fathers back from war. 1,800 lives that continued because one tail gunner trusted mathematics over manuals. The ripple effect of defiance, the compounding interest of survival, the exponential return on innovation. Cal never spoke about these numbers, never claimed credit for the doctrine change, never sought recognition for the lives saved indirectly through his direct action. He stayed quiet, stayed humble, stayed in service 15 years after earning the right to stop, because he understood something fundamental about duty, about sacrifice, about the debt owed to those who didn't come home. He survived when 90 men from his group died in 2 months, survived when doctrine promised death, survived when mathematics said his time was up. That survival wasn't luck, wasn't random, wasn't the universe favoring one man over others. It was choice, calculation, defiance when defiance was required. And having survived, he owed something to those who hadn't, owed them continued service, owed them knowledge passed to the next generation, owed them the change he'd proven was possible. So he stayed, taught, served, until the body worn by war finally declared enough. Epilogue. Today, the tail gunner position exists only in museums and memories. The B-17 flies only at air shows. The Luftwaffe is an ally. The sky that once ran red with tracers now carries commercial traffic. But the lesson remains: when doctrine fails, question it. When orders guarantee death, defy them. When mathematics prove a better way, trust calculation over regulation. Individual innovation can change institutional policy. One man's defiance can save thousands. The equation of survival sometimes requires breaking every rule written by those who've never faced the test. Callum Brenner proved this at 24 years old. In a plexiglass bubble 4 feet wide and 5 feet long, at 25,000 feet where temperature drops to 60 below and enemies approach at 600 miles per hour. He proved it with 17 kills, 1,800 lives saved, and a doctrine changed forever. The medals are in a drawer somewhere, forgotten by most, unknown to many. But the mathematics endure, the principles survive. The legacy continues in every pilot and gunner and soldier who questions failing doctrine, who trusts evidence over authority, who chooses survival through innovation rather than death through obedience. Staff Sergeant Callum Brenner, 24 years old, tail gunner, B-17 Iron Resolve, 17 confirmed kills, 1,800 lives saved, one equation solved through defiance. His war ended in 1943. His service ended in 1962. His life ended in 1990. But the mathematics he proved will never end. They echo in every sky where men face impossible odds and choose to fight anyway. They echo in every moment when regulation conflicts with reality. They echo in every decision to trust calculation over consensus. The equation of survival, written in tracers, proven in blood, changed forever by one man who refused to die quietly. That's the legacy. That's what endures. That's what matters. Not 17 kills, but 1,800 lives. Not one man's survival, but thousands saved through one man's defiance. Not the medals in a drawer, but the doctrine changed forever. Callum Brenner never sought fame, never claimed heroism, never demanded recognition. He just did the mathematics, trusted the numbers, proved there was a better way, and in proving it, saved more lives than he ever took. That's the equation. That's the legacy. That's the story of the tail gunner who destroyed 17 German fighters and saved 1,800 American lives by refusing to follow orders that guaranteed death. His name is carved in white stone in Arizona. His record is archived in Georgia. His methods are taught wherever survival matters more than regulation. The mathematics he proved will outlive us all, because truth endures longer than doctrine. Innovation survives longer than policy. And the courage to defy failing systems saves more lives than the obedience to preserve them. Staff Sergeant Callum Brenner. The equation of survival. Proven at altitude, written in tracers, change forever.